related to like, what do you do also if your work almost is adjacent to the work you're doing professionally? I did listen to your episode on, that one person who was working while at work, like working on their side hustle while at work. So I get that like concept of intellectual property, but I guess maybe if there are resources that you have about where those lines are drawn, that'd be helpful too.
Love it. So let me answer that question first.
Yeah.
And I hope I don't forget my third point, which involves other people. I think I'll remember. So to answer that question in particular, my first question would be, does your employer have a conflict of interest policy? And they probably do if you're working for a large company or a university. Most have something. So that will give you some really clear lines of delineation that you don't even have to think about. So I would find that out first. What is the conflicts of interest policy? And then if you have one, draw your lines there. If you don't have a conflict of interest policy, what I always recommend is, like, I remember that question that you were talking about, and this person sounded like they were kind of like hiding, like doing the stuff but not really letting anybody know. I don't really like that approach, because if someone finds out, and obviously if you're doing this work, you're not going to do it in secret in a box by yourself. Who knows what conversations people are having? But I would suggest like speaking with your employer and saying, hey, I want to create this side hustle. FYI, do you have any questions? And then the third thing is, obviously you have some expertise, you have some experience, you have things that you've learned. And that's not anything an employer can take away from you. So it makes sense if your work is adjacent. But kind of like I said in that episode, you mentioned keeping things separate is good professionally, and it's also good personally, because you want to be clear that whatever, if it's a side hustle, if it's 2 or 3 side hustles, whatever, that whatever you're bringing to wherever you are, it's your whole self. And if you are trying to serve, multiple masters with this one thing, you'll get burnt out, like really burnt out. And so if it's adjacent work, I think it's fine, and you should leverage that background and experience and expertise that you have, but keep them different enough so that there's no question that there's a professional conflict.
Okay.
And so I would say, like, if the work you're doing right now is recruiting, then perhaps your side hustle is not so much about step by step, here's how you recruit college graduates to your company, but maybe it's more around how to support new employees once they come into a company, or if it's revolving around college students, how to prepare for a career in corporate America or with any employer, or whatever the case might be. So I would try to draw lines around things and be really clear with your employer where those lines are drawn.
Okay.
Yeah. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thanks.
Okay. So then the third thing I would say, in terms of just figuring out where you should go next if you are thinking about creating a side hustle, is, what do people ask for your advice about right now? People at work, people who know you, people who knew you when you were 4 or 5 years old. It's like, where do you get questions? What types of advice are people asking you for right now? And the reason I think that's helpful is, when you create a business, it's not a business with you by yourself, it's other people recognizing the value in whatever you're selling. So right now, people already have to recognize the value in what you bring to the table if they're asking you for advice or opinions or help. So how can you take, that stuff people already see in you and maybe turn it into something? And so, like you mentioned, an ice cream shop earlier. Not saying creating an ice cream shop is not the right idea, but if nobody's ever asked you about an ice cream recipe or about anything in that realm, not yet. I mean, maybe they just haven't tasted your ice cream yet, but you just know it'll take you a lot more work
Yeah.
To market yourself that way to folks. Not saying you shouldn't do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that might help you get some clarity
on
just of all the ideas you have, which one to engage in. And then I think once you come up with a list of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of those things, and once you kind of do all this work, start with number 1, try it. Just see what happens. Start doing it. And if it feels good, continue down that path. If it doesn't, don't move on to the next thing. I don't think you should try all 4 at once, or all 3 at once, or 2 things at once. One thing at a time.
Okay.
And you'll figure out probably pretty quickly whether or not that's the thing. And like you said earlier, you hear this advice all the time, like, oh, I don't work a day of my life because I love what I do. I love what I do, but I feel like I work pretty hard, So I wouldn't be looking for that magical, glittery feeling either, because I don't think that is reality for most people. This is what I say.
Well, that's all been so helpful. I think even what you're getting at here are ways to identify some of those skills outside of you thinking about it, because sometimes I think that a lot of it can be confidence too, and so like not knowing your strengths because you're not confident in your strengths, or not knowing what direction you want to go because you don't see what other people can see, and that's oftentimes I think something that a lot of people deal with. I know I deal with it. So that third point, even thinking about what other people ask of you is super helpful in getting outside of your own mind too.
Yeah. And pick 5 people and ask them, hey, what do you think I'm really good at? Could you give me a list of 2 or 3 things that you think I'm really good at?
Yeah.
Pick 5 people you trust, friends, family, spouse, whatever. Just ask them, what am I really good at? And you probably will start to see some overlap with all of this.
So useful. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.